Okay, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this session of the Word Vancouver Festival. And we are going to have the pleasure of hearing from three memoirists today. So there's just a few things that I need to say. My name is Leanne Boshman. I'm going to facilitate this, this session. And we're really going to mostly focus on hearing from the authors themselves, and then having a chance to possibly ask some questions and have a discussion with those authors. So our first thing that we want to do for sure is to acknowledge that the festival takes place on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. So just taking a minute to think about the significance of that, and possibly the traditional and unceded lands where we all may be coming from, different parts of the province, of the country. I know for me, I'm coming from Vancouver Island, where I live on the traditional lands of the Cowichan tribes and Malahat Nation. We had a little slide up before with the some of the festival sponsors, but I've been asked just to acknowledge them here again. And that would be the Canada Arts Council, the Canada Heritage Fund, BC Gaming, Creative BC, the City of Vancouver, DBVIA, Hamburg Foundation, the Joseph Wask Foundation, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, Sewell, Pace and Associates, the Federation of BC Writers, the League of Canadian Poets, the Writers Union of Canada. And for a full list, you can go on the website, and some of those sponsors actually have tables outside in the arena area with their information that you can also browse. So I think what I would like to do is just open the floor now for our first reader. And coming up first, we have Jen Sookfong Lee. Jen was born and raised in Vancouver's East Side, and she now lives with her family in North Burnaby. Her books include The Conjoined, nominated for International Dublin Literary Award, and a finalist for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. The Better Mother, a finalist for the City of Vancouver Book Award. The End of East, The Shadow List, and Superfan, the book that she's going to be reading from today. Jen acquires and edits for ECW Press and co-hosts the literary podcast Can't Lit. So welcome, Jen.
I should be using this right. Hi, everybody. I love those bios. Those intros always make me seem very fancy. Guys should all know, not fancy at all. Pick up my dog's poop like everybody else. I just realized this is my reading copy of Superfan, and it's like all covered in printer toner. So when I was changing the toner on my printer, it exploded all over my desk. You know, authors, they're just like us. They're just regular people. I'm going to read from the chapter in Superfan where I write about Bob Ross. I'm sure you all know from The Joy of Painting. The guy with the perm, it was a perm. And he kept that perm for 11 years because he didn't want to upset his fans. He actually hated it. I know a lot about Bob Ross. Okay. I own a Bob Ross bobblehead, a Bob Ross t-shirt, and a Bob Ross board game. His long-running TV show, The Joy of Painting, premiered in 1983, the year I turned 7. I have never painted a landscape on canvas, but Bob Ross is so much a part of my lonely childhood memories that I truly believe that I could. The way Bob Ross paints is predictable. There is a formula to his method. Use the fewest number of strokes to suggest a tree or a mountain or a wave, and don't fuss. If you pause one of the episodes of The Joy of Painting and bring your face as close as possible to the screen, the swipes with his knife or the zigzags from his fan brush are just that, streaks and stamps of thick oil paint applied in as few layers as possible. There is no complexity, no subtext, just paint arranged so that the eye is drawn to the center of the canvas. There, a sunset, or an angled mountaintop, or maybe a small cottage, its roof blanketed in snow. There have been many essays written about his voice. Low, slow, steady, almost a murmur, punctuated by chuckles, and his hair, the fuzzy brown perm he maintained for the 11 years The Joy of Painting was on the air, so as not to disrupt the consistency his viewers wanted. As I stream an episode now, I am compelled to close my eyes, the better to slip into ASMR or autonomous sensory meridian response. So glad I said that right. My body relaxes and soon my scalp tingles. And I forget deadlines, parenting worries, and even the sounds of my dog chewing on her butt on the couch beside me. Bob Ross's voice can feel like a soothing touch without being touched. And when I open my eyes, Bob is smiling, gently skimming his palette knife over the edges of a mountain, making plains of snow where before there was nothing, only a deep blue black that suggests distance and rock and a cold to be protected against. Viewers may have come to his show wanting to learn how to paint landscapes, but many of them stayed for the half hour of calm he provided when time hardly seemed to move. To this day, if I can't sleep, I stream an episode on my laptop, and as soon as he smiles into the camera, I forget everything. The laundry piling up in the corner, the deadline I will probably miss, and finally, I sleep. My father grew up with three older sisters in a small two-room house in rural southern China, while my grandfather lived and worked in Vancouver. It wasn't until the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1947 that my father's family could apply for reunification and join my grandfather in Canada. My grandmother and aunts were strong women. They had survived Japanese occupation with no one to protect them but themselves. They could cook, clean, microfarm, raise babies, and lecture you with disappointment dripping off every word. By the time I was born, their edges had softened just a little, and I remember making my aunties microwave popcorn and watching a romantic comedy on VHS in my family's living room, all of us giggling at every kissing scene. Still, I watched my grandmother slaughter turtles for soup, gently tapping on the shell with the handle of her cleaver until the turtle inevitably poked out his head to investigate. Then the blade would come down, a swift movement that I could barely see, and his head would be rolling across the newspaper spread on the floor. Like my grandfather before him, my father was a gentle soul, a man who was far more comfortable being the youngest child in a household of take charge women than he was being the head of our family. For as long as anyone can remember, our lives have been dominated by women single mothers, older sisters, aunties who scolded as much as they loved. My maternal grandfather had three wives, and after he died when my mother was 9, her life was governed by a team of women, all of which she called Mama, whether they were her birth mother or not. At our house, women who gave orders were what my sisters and I knew. My father would return home from work every day and often fall silent as my sisters and I fought and laughed and shouted, and as my mother grew angrier and angrier. When I was young, my mother constantly battled the double headed monster of anxiety and depression, sometimes loudly blaming us for everything that had gone wrong that day, or that year, or for her entire life, sometimes retreating to my parents' bedroom, where she would stay for several days. I think my father brought her food and water, but I'm not sure she ever consumed it. You, she would yell, pointing at my sisters and me as we stood at her bedroom door. All of you. You hate me. When I die, you will all be happy. During those times, my father did what he could, delegating chores, cooking dinner. His favorites were meatloaf with ketchup sauce, boiled corned beef and cabbage, and potato salad with hard boiled eggs, and managing my mother's explosions of rage and sadness. If she was yelling, he tried to keep us away. If she was in bed weeping, he brought us in one by one to kiss her cheek. If she was listing off the many things we had done to hurt and ruin her, he told us to line up at the foot of the bed, oldest to youngest, so we could each tell her we were sorry. Sometimes we apologized for not cleaning up after ourselves, or speaking to her in a snotty tone, or excluding her from our rapid fire dinner time conversations that were always in English. As the youngest, I went last and mimicked my sister's expressions and words. My eldest sister, Wendy, was always the angriest, and she stood so straight I thought her spine might break in two from the tension. I'm sorry, she would say, the words enunciated clearly and quickly, like bullets. Daisy spoke gently, undercurrents of fear running through her voice. Jackie was quiet, but the resentment was in her face as she stared at the floor. Penny curled her body into itself. When it was my turn, I would say, I'm sorry, Mama. This ritual occurred throughout my childhood between the ages of 4 and 8. Even then, I knew that my mother was not being reasonable, that whatever we had done wrong in her eyes was not serious enough to warrant a reaction like this, and that not one of us felt the slightest bit sorry. According to her, there were many things we did wrong and almost nothing we did right. What if I locked you out and an old, scary lady came and took you away? That would solve all of my problems, she would hiss. If I didn't finish my dinner, she would tie me to my chair with baker's twine around my ankles and left wrist until I ate every piece of food in my bowl, even if it was congealing, even if it was the liver and kidney stir fry I hated most. More than once, after several hours, one of my sisters would secretly upend the remaining rice and meat into an unfolded paper napkin and bury the scrunched up ball in the kitchen garbage so that I could be set free. My father never did this. He never chastised my mother for her moods or stepped in when she was already raging. He had been surrounded by women with big personalities his whole life, yet he had no idea how to weather conflict or express his feelings or protect his children from his wife, who often resented their existence. He knew how to hide in the garage, fiddling with a fishing rod he had been trying to build for years. He was a gifted gardener and escaped the arguments that always erupted between my mother and sisters by retreating to the backyard, where, in his high rubber boots, he could overturn soil and nurture his cucumbers and beans and bok choy. He was much better at making interlinguistic puns, or telling us why Tina Turner was the best entertainer of his generation, or dancing slow circles around the kitchen with his youngest daughter, pretending our family life was as peaceful as that moment, even when both of us knew it wasn't, not at all. From the ages of 8 to 14, my life is marked by a series of departures. First is my sister Wendy. The same year my father is diagnosed with cancer, she gets married, packs her car to the roof, and drives across the country to Toronto. Then it's my sister Jackie, who delays her wedding by 6 months as we plan my father's funeral. Last, it's my sister Daisy, who gets married a year after Jackie and then moves to Hong Kong with her Singaporean husband. As I watch my sisters plan their weddings, pack, and leave, I note the relief written on their faces, as visible to me as their blue-lined eyes or feathered hair. They walk out the front door in new clothes and get into shiny cars driven by new husbands, waving with wide smiles and so incandescent with contagious happiness that I find myself waving back. My father's long illness, the funeral, the insurance, and other details, all of these things had forced my sisters and me into a tight unit for 5 years. The five of us often traveling as a pack to the hospital, choosing my father's funeral suit in a huddle at Moores, taking my mother for dinner so that none of us had to manage her alone. But as my older sisters left, Penny and I remained in the house, where grief was omnipresent, where our mother hovered at the periphery of our vision. Better not to engage, better to quietly wait until we could leave too. When my father died, Penny was not quite 19 and just starting her second year of university. Her bedroom had been the basement kitchen. The exposed duct for the missing stove hood hovered from the ceiling above her bed, and against the opposite wall was the old teal painted cabinet that my mother still used as her dry goods pantry. Our house had always been full, but in the aftermath of my father's death, my mother, Daisy, Jackie, Penny, and I scattered to its farthest corners, each into our own rooms, no matter what the room looked or smelled like, no matter if it was filled with boxes of mung beans and sacks of jasmine rice. As the years passed, we learned to cocoon in our own lives whenever possible. For Penny and me, both of us still at home and many years away from starting careers or getting married, that meant finding solitary activities. I drew angrily with pastels, each piece featuring a face that looked like a sad me, even if it was only a shadowy form in a bottom corner. I could hear Penny singing in her room, often accompanying the Les Miserables cast recording, or sometimes CMB by Color Me Bad. If you know Color Me Bad, then you know. Terrible songs. She was a great singer, a natural alto who could reach soprano range, whose voice barreled down the hallway and up the stairs, where I would stand at the top so she couldn't see me and listen. Every Saturday morning, I wake up, eat toast with peanut butter, then rush to finish my homework before lunchtime. My mother, as she often does, stays in her room. Shortly after noon, Penny comes up from the basement wearing her favorite giant navy blue sweatshirt and lies down on the love seat. I come out of my room and sit on the sofa, my feet propped up on the coffee table. We turn on the television to the local public station, and Bob Ross appears on the screen, balancing his palette on his forearm. Today, we're lucky. It's a joy of painting marathon. I close my eyes as Bob lists the paint colors he'll be using in this episode: cadmium yellow, phthalo blue, titanium white. Penny and I don't speak to each other. It's only Bob's voice drifting through the living room. Maybe this tree needs a little friend, he says, halfway through. A calm, masculine voice, one who only wants us to paint the best paintings we can in this pocket of contentment. And if we never paint at all, that's okay too. On Saturday afternoons, we're both okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. I'm sure there are going to be comments and questions and some responses to that reading. I know I am now looking at Lucy Montgomery and the Anne series in a totally different light after your book, Jen. And have some thoughts about that. Next, we're going to have Tara MacLean, who's going to join us virtually. And I will tell you a little bit about Tara. Canadian singer-songwriter Tara MacLean has been an internationally renowned and award-winning recording and touring artist for over 25 years. In 2008, Tara took a hiatus from being a touring artist to focus on being a full-time mother, raising her family on the beautiful west coast of Canada. She never stopped writing music. In 2016, she returned to music with a vengeance, writing, producing, and directing her hit show, Atlantic Blue, the stories of Atlantic Canada's iconic songwriters. Tara went on to release songs from Atlantic Blue and the full-length album Deeper before releasing her first book and an accompanying soundtrack in March 2023. Song of the Sparrow hit the bestseller list the first week out and has returned there several times. Tara is currently busy traveling overseas and from coast to coast at home in Canada, and she's joining us here now today. And we've got her. There she is. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm in Bath in the UK right now, so it's very late at night, hence the darkness. Yeah, this is my little book, and I guess I'll just do a little reading from it. I'd like to share the prologue, which is kind of the story of the first time I realized that music was the thing that was going to save me. So this is called The Key. And I'm very, very excited to hear it. This is so cool. I wish I could be there in person. So The Key. I still had sand between my toes when I stepped barefoot onto the plywood stage at the country fair. Like most mornings the summer I was 9, when we were living in a tent by the beach, the best way to get clean was to jump into the ocean. The waters of the Gulf Stream that flow around Prince Edward Island were as warm as a bath some days. The mornings could be a little brisk, and the soft, cool breeze made us shiver as we emerged from the ocean and walked onto the shore. It was like being born every day. Our bathing suits were hung on the tent lines to dry, and inside the constellations of mosquitoes on the nylon ceiling were fat and full from a night of feasting on the children. So many children. At the time, my mother had 3 of her own. Her new boyfriend, Izzy, had 4 boys from previous relationships. They were often around, our little scavenger wildling brothers. We were all free-range kids, raised by the earth. We had no money, but we had the Atlantic Ocean, and we had each other. To be honest, I wasn't a huge fan of my mother's boyfriend. I was old enough to be able to compare my relatively unstable life to the lives of most of my friends at school who lived the coveted, normal existence. In the 1980s, Charlottetown was a small, conservative church-going city with a wild fringe of hippies. Many who had resisted the U.S. draft nestled themselves into that scene, and Izzy was one of them. He was an alcoholic, an eccentric, and didn't seem to take much fatherly responsibility. He came and went as he liked and couldn't be counted upon, except to fulfill his own ever-changing needs. He was a wanderer. We lived in what we could afford at the time, a cabin, a bus, tents, shabby country homes, other people's houses. Food was often scarce. And if we didn't have money for gas, we would hitchhike. But the biggest thing for me was that I didn't think he deserved my beautiful mother, and she would be pregnant before we knew it, I was certain. Mom was the most exquisite, talented, and brilliant human being that had ever existed. And she was a queen in my eyes. so many mothers are to their daughters at that age. What was she doing with this clown? And he was literally a clown. He had a rainbow wig, a red nose, face paint, a penetrating with one giant wheel on the front and a little one in the back. He was the master of juggling and balloon animals, and most kids loved him. But I was on to him, and he knew it. Even though he was smarter than everyone on Jeopardy, even though he was a brilliant Shakespearean actor, I took eye rolling to Olympic levels with him. He was always wary of me and felt my searing judgment. But when I would sing, he would close his eyes and smile softly to himself. My mother used to tell me I was a bird because I sang before I spoke. Her little people would tell me I had a beautiful voice and I did love to sing, but I was determined to become anything but a musician. I was going to be normal if it was the last thing I did. The country fair in Kings County was filled to the brim with the scent of fresh-baked pies and burgers on the grill. In a giant field under a sapphire island sky, children ran happily and freely from picnic blankets to farm stands, gleefully bringing back treasures and treats. My little sister Shay loved catching crickets and squealed as they tickled the cave of her clasped hands with their sticky legs. Fishermen, farmers, families, and even folks from other counties came to feast and dance to the music, coming to the little makeshift stage at the center of it all. Maritime fiddlers and step dancers were backed up by the rubber boot band with their long beards and sweet smiles. I was wearing my one sundress that tied at the shoulders and had combed the salty tangles from my long chestnut hair. I was excited to hear the fiddles and hopefully run into my best friend Jenny, who lived around there. I noticed Izzy approaching me. I tried to look busy, retying my dress, peeling some skin from my sunburned shoulder, hoping he'd take the hint and go away. Instead, he sat down beside me, my blanket, and told me he had an idea. He convinced me to come with him to the stage and ask the band to back me up on a song. I was mortified at the idea of asking strangers if I could sing, but I was more fascinated than I was afraid. I had a few songs in my repertoire that most people would know, but Izzy wanted me to sing his favorite, You Light Up My Life. As I moved toward the stage, heart pounding, I noticed Izzy's hand on my shoulder as he steered me through the crowd of people. What normally would have irritated me suddenly felt cool and comforting. Izzy, for all his faults, had a fearlessness about him that was contagious. He was always unapologetically himself, and there was no box he could be put into, even on an island made of boxes. That's what made him so embarrassing, and at the same time, so deeply intriguing. The band welcomed us with a smile, and Izzy nudged me forward. I looked back at him. He gave an encouraging nod. He wasn't going to ask for me. If I wanted to do this, I had to be brave. I heard myself asking the band if they knew the song I wanted to sing. They laughed kindly and said, of course they did. It had been a huge hit in the 70s. Then they asked what key I sang it in. Well, I sure didn't know the answer to that. I didn't even know what that meant. I felt my teeth burning. The guitar player, seeing my hesitation, grabbed his instrument, sat at the edge of the stage, and asked me to sing it softly to him. In about 10 seconds, he had figured out this mysterious key and told the other musicians. They all nodded and asked me to come back in 5 minutes once their break was over. I couldn't believe it. I turned around and hugged Izzy tight, something that never happened. We walked slowly over to the lemonade stand. He took a few coins out of the pocket of his bell-bottom jeans. He bought me a cold drink and walked me quietly back to the stage. There was nothing to say. He knew my mind was racing, and he was just present with me, letting me prepare. My father came into my mind. He had taught me almost all the songs I knew, and when I was small, he would sing at the foot of my bed every night with his guitar, and I would sing harmony when everything was right in the world. But he was gone now, somewhere down south on a boat where there was no winter. There was no way to contact him, We just had to hope the southern winds would blow his ship toward the harbor of our family. As I moved toward the stage, I realized I'd forgotten my sandals on the blanket. I looked down at my bare feet, at the pink sand from this morning's rebirth. The stage looked splintery. I didn't have time to get my shoes because my name was being spoken into the microphone, and the crowd turned their attention to the stage. A hand reached down and pulled me up. My little sandy feet walked me to the microphone, and it was lowered in front of me to the exact height of my lips. I looked up, and I saw my mother smiling. Jenny had appeared and was beaming at me, surrounded by the other kids. Shay sat on the grass right in front of the stage, looking up at me with giant blue eyes, thick uncombed hair, all crickets released into the grass. Most of the faces in the crowd were kind and expectant. Parents hushed their children. The music began to play. Where are the words? I thought, I know this song. What are the first words? My heart jumped into my throat. What if no sounds came out? But the words flooded my brain just in time. So many nights I sit by my window, waiting for someone to sing me his song. I thought of my father and how often I would wait for his headlights to come down the driveway and light up my wall, throwing dancing shadows that promised the sound of his voice. I closed my eyes. I poured all my pain, all my longing, and all the love I had onto the people in the field. My voice carried over the land, through the trees and into the sky, and my arms raised up beside me, and it was like I was conducting the clouds. I pulled the sun into my hands and through my body, and my voice was amplified 1,000,000 times, resonating in every cell the sound could reach. Rolling in sea, adrift on the water. I saw myself begging my father to take me with him, to not leave us again. So many things I couldn't say. I couldn't tell him that it seemed like every house had hands that wanted to touch my little body, and that I was so hungry sometimes, and that the world wasn't safe. All I could do was sing it that day. Sing what I couldn't say. Sing everything I couldn't scream. My heart felt like it was on the outside of my body, and I was all inside out, and then something happened. Something I can't describe really. Something lifted out of me, and I was the sun, and the clouds, and the field, and the people, and the song. I was everything. I was free. My mother always said that faith is simply knowing a little bit of light can illuminate the darkest room. And when I finished, there was silence. It felt like it took a long time for the applause to begin, but it did. I smiled, I bowed, and I turned to thank the musicians. And they had tears in their eyes. I got off stage and Izzy was there. He pulled me into his arms for a hug, shaking with emotion. Look around, he said. As I lifted my eyes to the crowd, there were grown men sobbing into their overalls, wiping their faces with dirty cloths, and looking at me. At me. Izzy, with his arm around my shoulder, walked me over so I could meet them. I shook rough hands, I looked into tender eyes, and even though I was determined to be normal, I had to admit, I loved making people cry. It was different from a cry of pain. It was a cry out of pain. There was often a smile with the tears, a sun shower, something mystical, something healing, something light in this ever-expanding darkness guiding us home. What I didn't know at that moment was that I had just found the key to my survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Yeah, that was really, you could say, riveting, and I think this hybrid mode is one of the nice things that came out of the pandemic, so that we could have you with us today. Okay, next, our third reader today is Harrison Mooney, and is a best-selling author and journalist who was recently awarded the Rakuten Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for his debut memoir, Invisible Boy. Harrison is also nominated for 2 BC and Yukon Book Prizes and the prestigious Hurston Wright Legacy Award. His writing has also appeared in the Vancouver Sun, National Post, The Guardian, Yahoo, and MacLean's. He lives in East Vancouver with his family. Welcome, Harrison.
Going third, excuse me. Going third, I always want to do something just like big and weird and different. Like, okay, everyone, it's my turn. Like, let's get up. Let's start clapping. Let us rejoice and be glad. All right. But no, what I am going to do is read something that I haven't read before, because the thing I was going to read also involves a scene where my mom ties me to a chair and makes me eat my dinner. I was like, well, that's, yeah, I know. Like, that's just, we can't have 2 of those, right? It can't be, I think if it's that, similar, then the event should have been called like our moms tied us to chairs, Memoirs of Mommy Issues. So instead, I'm going to read a worse story. Even more horrifying. My name is Harrison Mooney. My book, Invisible Boy, tells the story of my adoption to a white family out in Abbotsford. We were very Christian, so Christian we got kicked out of a Pentecostal church and started our own. So yeah, some people get it. But there was this moment where we were kind of between churches, and we didn't have any real community around us. And my mom was, I think she was just struggling with the isolation, and it led to this one day in the summer that I talked to her about writing this story, and I said, I'm going to include this story. This is back before the book came out and we were still talking. And they're gone. And I explained to her, I'm not telling this story to be like, oh, well, my mom was so bad. Like, I'm telling this story to just explain, the feeling of it, the confusion of it, and the way that it led me to who I am now. It's an important story for context. And I don't know if that did anything to salvage the relationship between us for even another day. But I'm telling you guys as well, because that's what I said to her. Anyhow, this is from chapter 3, Gateway, or The Boy Whose Crown Was Worthless. I had to be my brother's slave. It was just for the day. We were playing together outside, Ben and I, in the sweltering heat. He was 12, I was 9. It was probably August, just after my birthday. We'd been out there for hours, jumping on the trampoline, the rubber rectangular kind. The circular mesh ones were safer, the experts insisted, but that made them less fun, we felt. First, we played crack the egg. You curl into a ball and try to stay that way while someone jumps around you. Ben could not be cracked, but he could bounce me from the middle to the springs. I had to lose the game to keep from getting hurt. Then we played do as I do and did difficult flips. When the heat became oppressive, we brought out the hose and we sprayed one another and used it to fill up the trampoline, letting it bulge until it touched the grass and made a pool. We were muddy and sweaty and soaked, and the front lawn was flooded. I had to use the bathroom, but I didn't want to go inside the house. It was hotter in there somehow. You got sticky right away, and there was no path to the toilet but to cross my mother's vision in the kitchen, and that would be the coldest moment of my day. She was barely there that summer. Just poop in the bushes, Ben said. So I crouched down and did, and we laughed. Then he pounced on his leverage. I'm going to tell Mom you did that, he said. Please don't, I responded, still squatting. I'm begging you, Ben, don't tell Mom. I won't tell Mom, my brother told me, smirking, if you be my slave. Ben was inspired by a Jughead adventure. When the Gazettes moved out just after Christmas, they left a stack of Christian Archie comics with some normal ones mixed in, all from the 40s and 50s. In Sleepy Time Pal, starring Jughead, Reggie sees a hypnotist on TV and learns how to hypnotize Archie's best friend. Jughead is tricked into being his slave. Slavery didn't seem so bad. Jughead gets a burger in the end, the same as always. And at school, in my bedroom upstairs, I learned that many slaves were treated very well by their masters. Who would treat me kinder than Ben, my best friend? We were growing up together, two adopted sons, one white, one black, like the fox and the hound, with secret games and handshakes, secret worlds, a secret language for ourselves. On long road trips, we would play Fogarty Fogarty Fee, an improvisational game we made up, a limitless rock, paper, scissors where you could be anything you could imagine versus whatever your brother decided to be and evolve as necessary to gain the upper hand with each attack. The only thing you couldn't be was God. He broke the game. Once I began as a barrel of monkeys. Over time, I became an intergalactic alliance, and Ben was defeated in space, which was common since every game ended the same way. Backed into a corner by a clever transformation, you shriveled up into infinity, and your brother found a way to be infinity plus one, and you were finished. Better slavery than a spanking, I said. We shook on it, and right away, he kicked his flip-flops off, and they went flying from the yard into the street. Retrieve my footwear, slave, he said. So I went out to get his shoes, and then he made me put them right back on his feet before he kicked them off again, and when I brought them back, I found him on the trampoline. Slaves stand in the mud, he said. Stay there and sing a song about how great I am. I did as I was told. Ben is great, I sang. He's oh so great, and I'm a silly boy. I wish that I was half as great as Ben. He said again, but louder this time, and hop on one foot in a circle. Things could be worse, I had thought, but they got worse. Later, when we came inside for lunch, he double-crossed me. Remember, Ben announced in a loud voice beside the fridge, you're still my slave. And this caught my mother's attention. Closing her Bible, she stood up from the table to interrogate us further. What do you mean, Ben? My brother insisted he couldn't disclose what had happened outside. It's a secret, he said. But my mother would not let it go. She threatened to ban us from Super Nintendo, and that's what we planned to play next. He confessed. My mother was aghast. That is completely inappropriate and downright revolting, she said. You don't do that. You're not a bushman, and I was punished. The punishment handed down by my mother was that I had to honor the shameful agreement and serve as my big brother's slave for the rest of the day. I was crushed. I had not considered that my mother might reward my brother's betrayal or institutionalize his supremacy over me. It was unthinkable, and the optics were brutal. A black son enslaved by his white family members? It sounded so grim out of context. But I knew that my mother was colorblind, and in this moment, she seemed to engage with even less of me than that, like she was exhausted from being my mother. That summer, my mother was especially short. She had committed to a season of fasting and prayer ahead of the Morris Cerullo Miracle Crusade, where she would sit as a prayer warrior delegate. The prophet, Mary Greenland, who gave her the gig, said she often prepared for these events with a 40-day fast in the manner of Jesus, Elijah, and Moses, the big three of the Bible. But my mother set a more modest goal. For 30 days, she lived on broth and water. The ordeal was building her up spiritually, no doubt, but she was suffering physically. It showed on her face and the veins that emerged as her skin became wan and translucent. She wore the weary countenance of a marathoner minus the mileage. Mostly she sat at the kitchen table with her eyes half closed, reading the Word, meditating on God, or half open, watching soaps and CBN and Sally Jesse Raphael. Maybe when I'm finished, she would tell us, I'll fit into the swimsuits that I used to wear in Fiji. It didn't seem worth it to me. It's not like we went to the beach or the pool or anywhere swimsuits were sported. Ben and I had a term for my mother's refusal to let us do anything, the fun limiter. It was in full effect that summer. My mother wasn't up for much, so everyone was grounded. I wanted to feed her. I wanted my father to come home from flying and beg her to eat, or anyone else to come over and see her just wasting away skin and bones. But she was starved for community too, set apart from the parents at school and the people at church, without friends. She was torturing herself, and someone had to intervene. But what could we do? We were nobody. We were silly little boys who pooped outside and flooded the yard, and she was the boss. Of course, she continued to feed us, McDonald's and Burger King mostly, but some nights she got a bit weird and she'd cook some extravagant thing out of nowhere and way out of character. For my birthday, she pulled out an old family recipe, sticky brown sugar fried chicken. The yellowing index card read, and it took her all day, and it tasted like nothing I've ever had since. And she watched us all eat it. She watched us all eat it, just smiling, deliriously happy. That was my birthday, though, my special day. But now I had debased myself. She barely had the strength to stand for long enough to handle it. So she washed her hands of me. That was the worst part, the choice to look past me, to keep things the way that they would be without her. While pooping, I'd thought I could run to her later if Ben turned out to be a real tyrant. But now I knew better, and so did my brother. His power over me was terrifying. I followed him upstairs as he commanded, with my head hung low, and made a little trampoline of tears inside my glasses. Fortunately, Ben knew as little about being a slaver as I did about being a slave. He bossed me around here and there, get me a Coke, do a jig, be my footstool. But mostly we played Super Nintendo in the big room in front of the fan. It was too hot for much else. But Ben did not forget his role as master. When I was winning, he would order me to lose. Or he'd give me a command that could not wait and win while I was underfoot or dancing or downstairs. It was underhanded, but if I resisted or complained, he threatened to tell our mother, and who could say what happened after that? So I obeyed him. I did not like being a slave, and I was glad for the day to be over, for I knew that I would be free in the next one. At bedtime, my mother warned me against telling anyone what happened, and then I was never quite free. I was bound to keep quiet. People will blow it all out of proportion, she said. Remember what the gazettes went through? The enemy is dead set on destroying Christian households, so don't go running your mouth around town. The move to suppress made me reassess what had really happened. Replaying the day in the dark, I discovered the great shame between us, like a poop in the bushes. The stink of it would follow us forever if I ever spoke about it, and my family would be judged when it was my fault. I was lucky to be homeschooled. The VCS parents would lose their whole minds if they heard about this. They would launch a new probe and they'd blame my poor mother, alleging abuse where there was none, convinced that my race was the reason for my subjugation, not something I did, only something I was. Typical American, the parents would scoff. She couldn't go a decade without making her black son play slave boy. How horrid. They'd call it unforgivable and skin her for a minor blip in judgment. They might try to have me removed from the house. But my mother was good. She was fasting for Christ's sake, and she wasn't herself when she made me a slave. She was starving. The color was gone from her eyes. 2 donuts now, glazed but not sweet, filled with nothing but deep disregard. She was normally better than that. You should taste what she made me for my birthday. And I shouldn't have put her in such a position at such a bad time in her 30-day fast. That's how I think of it now, if I only think once. And who wants to think twice about being a slave? I'd rather not recall the hottest day of August 1994. Yet some things are hard to forget, and forgetting too hard leaves a scar in the psyche that tells the whole story.
And I think that last statement you made, it somehow reflects what Memoir is about and what it does for us. And you mentioned that, you don't write a particular or recount a particular episode, scene in your family history. to highlight the badness of the adult who had so much power over you as a child, but to really kind of, focus on the emotion that and how that formed you and what that meant. And so I'm really curious for all of you, just to get the Q&A started, because I know you all have questions, or many of you will. But my question is then, how or does that emotion shift through the act of writing a memoir? Like, and I'm not saying it's always a therapeutic, just like really, what happens to those feelings? Are they diminished? Are they at one point amplified? Do you have more compassion? Just like what's happening with that?
No, you have an answer.
Okay, so my answer to that begins with a preface here. I'm going to therapy, like a lot of us are. I don't know if therapy, it's great. And after you read this book, you're like, oh, I hope he's in therapy. I am. I sure am, everyone. But so the other day I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, I don't want to go to therapy. Like, she's just going to tell me that I need to get happier. And then he was like, no, don't go to therapy to get better. Go to therapy to get ammunition for every fight about who you are. He's like, go there and then have somebody tell you, like, well, that's an issue you have, or that's a trait you have, and then you can come out and you can be like, that's an issue I have, and that's a trait I have. I was like, yeah, I like that. And it was a trick, because then I went to therapy and instead it like helped me and I talked about things and felt better. Didn't want to fight with anyone, but like for me, writing this book, it kind of did give me that. Like, it just gave me this certainty about what happened in moments that I wasn't sure about. And there are so many moments as a child where you're told, that what you experienced isn't what happened. You'll be told, like, oh, well, don't cry. You're not sad. You're not hurt. And in those moments, you kind of divorce yourself from your own reality. It's like, okay, well, I guess I'm not sad. I guess I'm not hurt. And for me, writing this book and then, reading back through it, it's like, oh, I am sad and I was hurt. And, and that I think has just given me a lot of confidence going forward. That's my answer. Your turn.
My answer is that I've also in therapy and have been for 30 years, yay for me. But the actually longer, probably 30, 40. I'm 47 this year. Oh my gosh. I've been counseling since I was 8 years old. But the thing about writing a book about your life is that you get to a point where it exists on paper, or as a Word document or whatever. And when you're in the process of revising or in edits with an editor, you're not looking at it as a testimonial about your life anymore. You're looking at the craft of it. How can I make this sentence better? How can I change the structure? How can I make the reader's experience of this story more immersive? And in that way, the events of your life become quite distant. They become kind of like a jigsaw puzzle of, like we approach any book. And for me, that's a real gift. I don't need to like roll around in my mother issues every day. I'd much rather think about what's the right way to describe my mother in 50 words or fewer. But it's for me that was really helpful, and like that's a very like writing teacher thing for me to say, but it's I find that really nice. See your life at a distance. Yeah, does Tara want to weigh in?
Sure. Well, also in therapy. Yep. Yay. Permanently. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that shocked me the most, emotionally, about writing about my book was there was just a lot that I didn't remember until I was writing. And that was a really wonderful thing to sort of uncover things and to see things my whole book was chronological. So I started to understand why I did things, like, why I behaved the way I behaved. And that was incredible insight. And the moment that I closed my book and gave it to my editor and it was all done, I was in the fetal position, like trying not to vomit because I had such a vulnerability hangover with giving it to the world. I actually, after that nausea passed, I felt light. I felt like I had just closed the all of that up and given it to the world to hold with me. And so my heart didn't feel so heavy anymore. And it was an absolute shocking experience. And then, and now I'm getting letters from other people sharing their stories with me. So it's kind of like this shared emotional experience. So yeah, it's the best thing I've ever done for myself, for sure.
Thank you. Members of the audience, just raise your hand and ask your questions, make your comments. Yes.
Thank you for that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the effect in your life of love or lack of love, and how you think it plays out maybe in your life now, or what you discovered writing of your earlier days.
Are you saying there was a lack of love? I'm kidding. I would. I think that in terms of being a writer, one of the lessons I really had to learn sort of early on was I couldn't be writing my books for other people. Like I couldn't be writing books to get people to like me, which was something you learn the hard way when you read the first 5 Goodreads reviews, right? Like people are not going to like you, a lot of them. And I think that growing up in a household where love felt conditional, whether it was or it wasn't, meant that I was already hardwired to want to do things to get people to like me. I was always, I'm a Leo. I'm a performative person. I try to make people laugh when people are fighting. I make a joke. I do a dance. I do a Marge Simpson voice. I do that very well, by the way. But how me? Anyway, Bart, stop it. Anyway, it's just all of those things I do because like I said, I want to make people laugh. I want to make people like me. But when you're a writer and you're writing things, the only real motivation to write a book is because it's something you actually want to write. Like it's something that is burning to get out. That is something that is so motivating that it puts you in that chair every day to actually write the thing. And then at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what other people think about it. I mean, it's nice if people like it. It's totally gratifying and wonderful when people come up to me or write me emails or like whatever. I love that. But that was a lesson I had to learn to connect that sort of like conditional love of my childhood to who I am as an author now. Here.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a little bit earlier. I don't want to be. I'm a lot earlier in my career than you are. I don't mean to say that you are a veteran writer and I am. I guess what I'm trying to say is I've written this one book. You've written a lot of books, and so this was my first experience with writing a book and still kind of entertaining the idea that when it's finished, everyone will like me. Or love me, and then I'll feel better about everything. And I mean, there's been some good critical reception here. I haven't made any money, so like my partner is not happy with me. So it didn't like it hasn't felt the way I thought it was gonna feel. And when I do, I get that validation. It's like, okay, well, I still feel like me all the time. I realize now, going back through my whole life, that there was just such a desperate desire to please people and to convince people that I was good. um and I know that some of that comes from being raised in a context where, yeah, like love was conditional. And it comes from being in a family where I had 2 brothers who were biological, and my parents would defend them like out of this innate understanding of who they were. And then not so much for me. And I came to understand that when I had kids of my own, and suddenly my son will, like, he'll just like throw a ball at everything in the the house till it's all broken. And I'll just be like, oh, well, that's just me. You know, that's exactly what I did at that age. You know, so there's a lot more understanding for him because I understand him. You know, and realizing that I wasn't going to get that from my adoptive family. Like I really just kind of strained to try to be accepted and to be liked. And you know, going back through this story, I saw that really clearly. I mean, even, you know, writing the selection that I read today, I don't think I'd realized until I put those words down that I still blamed myself for this moment that is not in any way my fault. You know, my mom is supposed to step in and say, you can't do that to my brother and not to me for pooping in the bushes. So, you know, it's something that I think I'm learning now that I really need to get away from, you know, from seeking that validation elsewhere, and focus, I think, on like actually loving myself, you know, and not worrying whether or not the audience for my book is going to give me a love that needs to be intrinsic first. And that's my answer.
Okay, and so Tara, the question is about the element of love or lack of love and how that figures into the writing. And
Okay.
you want to
I mean,
comment on that?
Sure. And first, I want to say there's also a little scene about pooping in the woods in my book as well. So I feel like there's a whole lot of, you know, commonalities here. That was just because I was trying to avoid the outhouse. Um, but in terms of love, my whole book is about it. That's all it is about. The book is about, you know, is about trying to find out what real love is in a world where so many things present itself and looks like love. So I guess really the whole journey of writing this book was really trying to identify, you know, what true love is, and how am I a loving creature, and how can I express my love, and how can I weed out the things that are toxic, that are pretending to be love. So love, and literally my whole epilogue, I think the word love appears like 300 times in the book because I'm trying to figure it out, you know, like, and I feel like that's kind of what we're here for, is to love. And so you know, in the end, I just say, like, you know, that love is my wingspan, and that is, you know, the love I want to give the world. And the book works a lot with forgiveness as well. So yeah, because there's a lot to forgive, and also, you know, how problematic that can be, how tricky that can be, and yeah. So, and really, I wrote the book for my daughters because life is hard, and I wanted them to have a little bit of a guide, you know, a guide through the darkness about how to maybe find out what love really is and what it looks like.
Okay, thank you so much. Wow, some really great correspondences we're finding here between the books, the themes. And all we can do at this point, because we have run out of time, is send some love to these authors, and ask you questions maybe. Okay. Thank you, all of you, Jen, Harrison, and Tara. And I know there may be more questions, comments. Are you guys available a few more minutes? So when we go out the corridor, there is another reading in this space, but yeah, anyway. And thank you all for being present for the reading. Okay. Thank you.